Assalamu alaikum, my name is Yusuf, a graduate from culinary school, and I've also worked under a head chef at a 5-star hotel. These days I spend my time teaching people how to cook online. This is a brand new series brought to you at Freshly Grounded, where we take a look at foods around the world that might not necessarily be halal, and we give them to you made halal. On today's episode, we're taking a look at sushi. This is actually something that was written to us in the comments. So if you'd like to see something coming up on this series, definitely leave a comment below and we will try and take a look at it and get to it. Now, sushi is one of those things that you might be thinking, is this something that needs to be made halal? It's just rice and fish and seaweed, right? But this is one of those hidden things. And unfortunately, in a lot of sushi that is made, the rice is sort of flavored with sake, which is rice wine. This is something that you might not be aware of when you go to sushi restaurants, for example, or buy sushi from shops, because it has fish, right? So it seems like it'd be halal. But today we're going to take a look at sushi without that rice wine and trying to replicate it and make it as professional as possible. But before I get to actually making sushi, I need to know what we're up against. This is something that's considered an art in Japanese culture. So we're going to take a look at some good quality sushi and see what the quality points are and how we can try and replicate that. Okay, so we're in the studio now and we've just ordered us some sushi that we can try out. What we have here is an assortment. We have some with crab, some with some salmon, and some with tuna as well. And we also have some shrimp tempura. Now, the main thing I'm actually looking for is not the filling or the type of sushi, it's actually the rice, because the main quality point in looking for good sushi is the rice. Now, you'd be surprised that something as simple as this can actually have alcohol inside it, so you actually have to make sure you ask a restaurant to not put rice wine in their rice before you try it. It's one of those things that you won't realize that you're eating, but it definitely does have it inside it. So once you've made sure that it's absolutely fine, we can go ahead and eat it. Bismillah. Now, the rice isn't actually too bad. The main thing about sushi is that it's meant to be quite vinegared. And this doesn't have a hugely vinegared flavor, but I'm not complaining. It's quite decent. And I'm actually gonna try the prawn tempura as well. You should be able to hear a nice satisfying crunch if it's good. So yeah, this prawn tempura is actually not too bad. It's actually covered in panko breadcrumbs, which are traditionally Japanese sort of breadcrumbs. The only thing is though, tempura is traditionally a batter, so we're going to try and recreate this in a batter form rather than covering it with breadcrumbs. But this is also a popular way of serving prawns covered in Japanese breadcrumbs as well. Okay, so I've pretty much seen everything I want to see. I'm going to finish this whole thing off because I'm really hungry, and then we're going to go ahead and crack on with filming our sushi. Now, just as a disclaimer, sushi is not something that can just be done or learnt overnight. Traditionally in Japan, chefs will have to train for years before they can consider themselves anywhere near the level to be like a proper sushi chef. So as I'm making this video and as you're trying to make it at home, bear in mind that our sushi attempts will be to the best of our abilities, and of course it takes many years to become a proper sushi master. Before we get started, I'm going to sharpen my knives. In professional sushi kitchens, they actually spend about half an hour to 1 hour right at the beginning of the day just sharpening all their knives, because having a sharp knife is incredibly important in the process of making sushi. When you have a properly sharpened knife, that's how you get the proper sashimi cuts, that's how you get those nice clean cuts of your sushi rolls. Without that sharp knife, you're just going to have a really sloppy job, so make sure you've got a really nice sharp knife. So firstly, we need sushi grade rice. This is a rice grain that is even shorter than risotto. It's really sort of sticky and they look like little tiny pearls in a packet. Now, if you're sitting at home wondering if you can replicate this with regular rice or basmati rice, you absolutely can't. It has to be sushi rice. So what I'm going to do is pour an entire packet of sushi rice into a bowl, and we're going to rinse this 3 times to remove the excess starch. As you can see, as I'm washing it, that excess starch is sort of clouding up. This starch is on all rice, and I'm sure a lot of you will wash rice anyway. And what we're going to do is remove the excess starch so that we can see those individual grains at the end. It's still going to stick together, but what we don't want is that it just clumps together one big block and it becomes really sort of tough to eat. So once we've rinsed it 3 times, I'm going to add in some fresh cold water to it and let it soak for 30 minutes. Sushi rice is a bit interesting to cook compared to like basmati rice, for example. So what we want to do is soak it for 30 minutes. This will allow those rice grains to become nice and tender, and it will prevent us from having, really hard rice in the center. So what I'm going to do now is put it in a saucepan and fill it up with enough water just so that it's below this little part of my finger. Normally you'd add a bit more, about 1 inch of water if you're making basmati rice, but we're adding a little bit less because sushi rice is cooked a little bit different. I'm also at this point going to season it with just a dash of salt, not too much, because remember we have the soy sauce at the end, so just a dash of salt is enough. And we're going to bring it to a boil, and as you start to see it boiling, we're going to immediately cover it, simmer it for about 10 to 15 minutes, and afterwards you should see that the rice has absorbed. Give it a little taste, make sure that the rice is fully cooked through, and then we can actually put the sushi into this rice. Now, sushi originally translates to having a vinegared or a sour taste, so it's really important that we get this vinegaring process right. Now, what I've got is some rice vinegar, making sure you check the ingredients to make sure there's no alcohol or anything present inside it, and we're going to add a pinch of salt and some sugar to this mixture to make it a sort of sweet and salty, pickly sort of flavor. As you can see, I've transferred my rice to a large dish. We want to cool and also flavor this rice simultaneously. Now, this means we're going to use a spatula and something to fan it with. This can be literally a plate, you know, a large tray, anything like that is absolutely fine. So what I'm going to do is pour my vinegared mix over the spatula so that it distributes over the rice nice and evenly. And we're going to sort of fold it in. You don't want to mash it together. That's going to really break apart the rice. We want the rice to be nice and individual. And I'm just going to fold it through, and once I've folded it through, I'm going to use my piece of plastic and just fan it really well. This is going to do two things. One, it's going to allow the vinegar to stick to the rice rather than to soak to the bottom. And two, it's going to cool it down nice and quickly, because the rice has to be absolutely cold before the fish goes on it. Otherwise, of course, it's going to start to cook the fish, and that's not ideal. Okay, so once you've done this enough times and your rice is nice and soaked in vinegar, you'll know you've done it right, because it should be glistening like lots of little jewels across this little plate. I'm going to leave it somewhere on the side to cool down while I prep my fish. Now, we're making a few types of sushi here, so I'm just going to take you step by step. So the first thing we're looking at is our nigiri. Now, it's really important that you don't just use any old fish. Don't just take fish out of the freezer and hope for the best. Don't take fish that you've had in your fridge for like 2 days. Make sure it's really, really fresh fish. You're eating this raw, bear in mind. So I've got some really fresh tuna steaks, and what I've done is I've sort of cut it in a way where I know that shape is going to be the perfect shape to sort of cover that little ball of rice. And as you can see, the knife I'm using here is quite long, and I recommend, if you have one, to use a longer knife, because you can get that movement in one stroke. And we're going to cut it at an angle in order to try and get that perfect sashimi, and that's going to form our nigiri. Now, when shaping our nigiri, it's really important that we wet our hands. So what I've done is I've taken my leftover vinegar, sugar and salt mixture, I've added some water to it to dilute it a bit. And what I'm going to do is literally just wipe my hands together and grab onto that rice. A little ball of it will do, and you're just going to shape it as best as you can into a sort of oval type shape. To be honest, you can play around with the shape. It totally depends on the sashimi size that you've cut. It might be longer, it might be shorter, and I'm just going to drape carefully that sashimi piece over the rice. Traditionally, a little dab of wasabi is used to cement the two pieces together, and I'm just going to repeat this a few times in order to finish our nigiri. Now, that is our classic simple way of having sushi. Now, if you want to go a little bit further, we can try the maki roll. Now, with the maki roll, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a bamboo sushi mat. If you don't have one, that's absolutely fine. Just use a couple layers of foil and it will serve exactly the same kind of function. So what I'm going to do is take my nori or seaweed, and I'm going to place it shiny side down. Remember, the shiny side needs to be on the outside because you want it to look nice and shiny. That's the presentation side. And that's sort of the golden rule of sushi, that the nori has to be shiny side outwards. So wetting my hands again, I'm going to take some of my sushi rice and I'm going to place it onto the matte side or the non-shiny side, and I'm going to spread it out. Now, it's really important that we don't mash the rice onto it. We're using my fingertips to just sort of press it in, spreading it out nice and evenly. I'm leaving a little bit at the top where I can just wet it, which will allow it to seal quite nicely. And then prior to this, I took my tuna and cut it into thin strips, and I took my cucumber, halving it, scooping out those seeds so that we don't have any excess water, and I cut them into thin strips which can be used to fill the maki. So as you can see, once the rice is nicely laid out, what I've done is put strips of tuna and cucumber, filling the bottom part of it, and I'm going to make one roll just to cover that entire filling, making sure it's nicely secured. I'm going to pull it back. Don't be afraid to, pull it back and go forward again, just to make sure that the shape is right. I'm going to roll it over again, shaping it, bring it back, have a look, and keep rolling it all the way until the end, until you're absolutely happy with it. And what I'm going to do is just right at the end, shape it into a nice circular shape. And that is our maki roll basically done. Now, in order to cut this, what I'm going to do is take a tissue and dab it into that wet mixture. I'm going to run that along the blade of my knife, and this is really going to help. If you've ever tried to make sushi and you try to cut it and the rice is sticking to everything, this tip will really help you. So we're going to make a long sawing type of motion with our knife. You don't want to sort of press down on it. It's going to really ruin that shape and squeeze the rice out. Take your time and make nice long strokes with your knife, cutting all the way through it and then cutting it into your desired size. And once you've cut it to your desired size, there is your finished maki. Okay, so now that we've done our two basic rolls, the nigiri and the maki, we're going to move on to the California roll. Now, the California roll is actually quite interesting. So when sushi first came over from Japan to America and one of the first sushi shops was opened, The chef realized that it wasn't doing very well because Americans didn't like seeing the seaweed on the outside. So he flipped it over and rolled it with the rice on the outside and created the California roll. And obviously they really liked it, which is quite funny actually because it's literally just a maki roll inside out. But it's become one of the most popular rolls today, and so we're going to make that actually with some cooked tuna from a tin. So if you're someone that's really sort of iffy about using fresh tuna, or you can't access fresh tuna around you, then this is the perfect one for you. It's a really simple recipe. All I'm going to do to make the filling is open a can of tuna. Once you've drained it, I'm going to add in some sriracha and some mayonnaise. It's totally up to you the quantities that you want to use. Now, traditionally, the California roll has crab meat inside of it. Now, crab meat is quite expensive, and I'm mindful that we've just used tuna in the last 2 rolls. So once you've mixed all that together, what I'm going to do is exactly as we had with our maki. I'm going to have my shiny side on the outside, putting a thin layer of our rice on the non-shiny side, and this time I'm going to flip the whole thing over onto my bamboo mat so the rice is actually on the other side. What I'm going to do is take my tuna filling and make a thin layer of it, followed up with some cucumber. And I'm just going to carefully roll it exactly as we did with the maki, making sure that it's nice and carefully done. And exactly the same as our maki, I'm just going to slice it into our portions. And now we're going to end with a bang. We're going to make a sushi roll that's just got that wow factor to it. We're going to make the dragon roll. Now this is quite simply in the style of a California roll where it's sort of flipped inside out, except this time we're going to add some prawn tempura inside it and top it with some avocado slices. Now to make the prawn tempura, it's actually quite simple. To make a basic tempura, you're going to use an equal amount of plain flour and corn flour. I'm using about 50 grams of each. You're going to mix that together and crack in 1 egg and a little bit of water just to make a paste that has this consistency. It's going to be sort of quite thick so that it can coat that prawn really nicely. As you can see, the prawn is sort of shaped in a C-type shape and tempura is normally quite straight. So in order to straighten it out a little bit, one tip that you can use is by making a couple cuts and just flatten the whole thing out. Okay, so before we start our tempura, we need to make sure that our prawns are nice and clean. So what I'm going to do is run my knife along the back of the prawn, just checking to make sure that that sort of digestive tract has been removed. Because the last thing you want is to bite into that tempura and have that gritty kind of taste to it. Now I've preheated a shallow pan with some oil in it. You don't need a lot of oil. I'm just going to take my prawns and dip it, making sure they're nice and coated in the tempura. And I'm just going to lay them away from me into that pan, allowing them to fry. And that corn flour presence inside it is going to really give that nice sort of crispy batter. Once it's totally cooked, we're going to drain it and move it to one side. Now when it comes to rolling this, it's really simple. So exactly the same as our sort of spicy tuna roll, what I'm going to do is sprinkle the sesame seeds on our flattened rice. And once it's flipped over, I'm going to take my battered prawns and lay them on the bottom, adding in a strip of cucumber just above it. And we're going to roll it up exactly as we did it with the maki, exactly as we did with the tuna roll. It's all the same thing. This time though, once it's completely rolled up, I'm going to take an avocado, and this is something that's such a simple trick, but it's really going to wow your friends and family if you try it out. We're going to take half the avocado and placing it alongside our sushi roll so that we can get the right size. I'm going to make lots of really thin slices all the way across it. Once you made it right to the end, you're going to use your palm to gently flatten that out and spread it. Now you can spread this avocado as long or as short as you want, but I'm obviously going to make it try and fit the actual sushi roll itself. Once you've made it fit that sushi roll, we're going to use our knife to tuck it under the avocado and gently lift it and place it on top of our sushi roll. I'm going to use my mat, or if you're using foil, you can use your foil, and just gently press down the edges to make it nice and perfect. Now there's 2 ways that we can go ahead decorating this. We have our sriracha method, in which case I'm just going to take a bottle of sriracha and drizzle it all the way across, giving that really nice spiciness which will contrast the creaminess of the avocado. Or if you're feeling really fancy, we can top it off with some salmon caviar. This is not the easiest thing to find, but you can find it in some of the more upper market supermarkets. I'm just going to use a teaspoon to gently place some of these beautiful orange pearls onto the top of our avocado. And this is something that can be served up with some soy sauce. It's really important that you check your soy sauce, however, because often it has ethanol or alcohol inside of it. And now, after all that hard work, let's see how it tastes. Bismillah. Yeah, so the quality of rice is perfect. I mean, you can even see it sticking to my fingers. So it's got that sticky quality, even though we washed all that starch out. And it's got that nice vinegary flavor. And it's really balanced with the sort of fishiness of the tuna and the saltiness of the soy sauce as well. Between each piece of sushi that you eat, the ginger is there as a palate cleanser. So rather than getting the flavors confused, if you want to appreciate each flavor, piece of ginger between each piece, and that allows you to really appreciate each flavor.